Hi everyone. In this part of the video, I am going to explain the changes I made to a Patreon's piece as part of my art review service. At the end of the video, you will find a time lapse. So I just want to focus on the reasoning behind these changes in this part. And this is the overpaint with those changes, and this is the original. And as you can see, it's a piece that is obviously been taken care of. There's a lot of effort behind it. However, there were two main things that I noticed that jumped to my side when I first saw it. Those were proportions and value range. So let's start with proportions. As you can see in the notes, I made a point to place the rib cage and the waist. That's because those are the two main shapes of the body, okay? In a pose like this, it's a standing pose in a neutral kind of fashion. So you are going to see that the rib cage and the waist have opposite angles, okay? Between each other, they form an obtuse angle, sort of like 120 degrees. And the rib cage is mostly a box, a rectangular box that is going to be two times the height of the waist. The waist opens up at the bottom around the place where the great trochanter and the pubic bone is. And this is very important because I know some people use heads, and it's something that you can use to measure the body. The problem is that the heads are not going to work in a flexing pose, for example. So here, with the waist placed, you're going to take the point where the crown of the skull is, which is the highest point of the skull. Is you are going to find it above the ear, usually. And from that point, you are going to find the height uh, of the of those 2 points. Okay, the length between those 2 points. That height is going to be duplicated, and that's going to be the total height of the body. Okay, you can see that more or less that fulfills the general rule I just mentioned. So yeah, this is for obviously for adult bodies, and you're going to find some leeway. It's not going to be exactly that. So it's just a general rule, okay? So let's go back to the proportions thing. This is very important also because the heads in the original were too small. And here is going to differ between the figures because for females, you can find that the shoulder width is going to be 2 to 2.5 heads of width. And in the males, it's going to be from 2.5 to 3. Also, a general rule, okay? It's just so you have a point of reference, okay? Um, so yeah, the proportions I just tackled the main ones, okay, the main shapes of the body as mentioned, but there are other proportions that were off. Uh, let's move this out. For example, in the case of the groom, the eyes are way too small. In the overpaint, you can see that the eye, if you extrapolate, you are going to find that there are three eyes in the front plane of the face. And by front plane, I mean the part where the zygomatic arch starts. You can use that point as a corner to divide the side of the skull and the front of the skull. Okay, so that front plane is going to be three eyes wide. Okay, very important that you try to internalize those measures. It's not only good to memorize them, but also get the feeling of what the proper measure should be, or at least the ballpark. Okay, the range, the proper range where those measures fall. Okay, something else that is a bit outside of the proportions is related to proportions, but it's not exactly that. is the way you shade, okay? Because having those basic shapes placed in the body, that's going to affect the values that you are going to use. And what I mean by that, okay, you can see, let's delete this, that in the case of the top of the shoulder and the back of the waist, those planes share the same angle. The hair also, some areas of the hair is going to have the same angle. Let's draw that to be more emphatic. So yeah, uh, that pure white value that is mostly all over the place here uh, is restricted. Okay, it's used sparingly in the overpaint to depict those planes that share the same angle. So you can have that general rule too. If there are two different planes, but they share the same angle, the value is going to be mostly the same. There are other things that influence that decision, like for example, if you are using a chiaroscuro, if the illumination, the lighting, is focused, so there's only a very narrow scope of the light. But here, for example, where the light is coming from a sun, you are going to find that those angles, those planes that share the same angle, are going to be covered by the same value, the same brightness. Okay, if you want to see it that way. Okay, so I think that's a proper place to start with the next point, which is the value range. Okay, as mentioned, the other thing I noticed is that the value range is off. Why it is off? Because the value range is too wide. It starts from the darkest dark possible, which is pure black, and moves towards pure white. And there are pieces, especially classical pieces, that you are going to find that. However, it's very challenging. I don't advise that you pick such a wide value range because it's going to be very difficult to juggle those values at the same time. So in the overpaint, I made a point to narrow the scope of the value range. So there are some places that you use that are covered with almost pure black, not white, but very near pure black, and the pure white is only used in certain areas. Okay, the the thing I said about the dress is visible here. In the original, the dress was almost pure white in different places, and that's a problem. Not only because you're using white too much, it's because uh, the value is not indicating me the direction of the light. Okay, here, as noticed before, you can see the direction of the light is can be inferred by the planes that share that pure white value. Okay. Um, so yeah, what I said about the shadows, for example, that you should reserve that pure black or your darkest dark for occlusion shadows. Occlusion shadows, as I mentioned in past videos, is when two objects or two planes are too close together, and the crevice that results for that proximity does not allow the light to escape. Okay, you can see it here, for example, the structure at the top and the column create an occlusion shadow that is very dark. And the bodies, when they are close together, you are going to find a crevice that is almost pure black. Same goes for the pants and the structure, and the dress and the ground. Um, yeah, so keep that in mind because narrowing your value range is going to be very useful for rendering, because rendering should be simplified, because simplification in rendering equals improved readability for your viewer. Okay, so yeah, I think that's about it. There is a small thing that I wanted to say about the value range. Let me check again. Oh yeah, another reason why you should avoid too dark values in your shadows is because besides the occlusion shadows, I already explained what those are. You're going to have drop shadows that are also quite dark. Not as dark as occlusion shadow, but they are dark. Dark enough. Here, for example, you have a drop shadow that is very dark. The problem is that while it is true that that is a shadow and is the result of an element that is blocking the photons of the light, that shadow is going to have certain length. That length is going to be large enough to be covered by some bounce light. Okay, so for example here, the reason why my drop shadow is not as dark as the as my patrons is because here the light is bouncing towards that plane. So that bounce of light is going to brighten, make brighter that drop shadow. Okay, I think that's another issue in other drop shadows. Yeah, you can see it here, for example. The drop shadow is still dark, but not as dark as in the original piece. Okay, so yeah, I hope those two elements were explained enough. And let's move to the next points. Okay. Um, Something that I forgot to mention is that the forearm and the top of the shoulder share the same angle too. However, since the forearm is farther from the source of light, I made that area less bright to create a sense of distance. Okay, you can say the same about the cheeks of the groom. It's the same angle. However, it's less bright. But in this case, it's also because the material is different. The skin by itself, inherently, is more is less contrast than the dress. The dress is kind of reflective, more so than the skin at least. So that's why you see very low contrast on both skin tones. But in the dress, you are going to find areas where the contrast jumps quite abruptly because the material is different. Okay. Um, the tail is also something that was changed. Remember the thing I just said about the contrast. Metals are more high contrast, so you are going to see these bumps in brightness. This difference in value change very abrupt compared to other materials. So in the original, this was not conveyed because it was too bright and the contrast was too low. You can see that the borders between the bright area and the dark area um, are soft edges. And there's another thing that indicates contrast, the edges. In the overpaint, you can see that the edges are a bit harder. There are some soft edges too, but there are much more hard edge compared to the original. Okay. I also made a point to show that drop shadow strategically on top of the bot to remark the topology of the bot. Okay, there are many there are many signals that are not apparent at first that you can use to reinforce form, reinforce topology. That drop shadow of the tail, the near one, is one of them. Another, for example, are the folds. You can see how the folds melt at the top to indicate the bottom of the bot. Okay, and this is not something that you will find in the original. And I wanted to add that to the piece to show form, show anatomy. Uh, so yeah, I hope you can see how that changes, how the piece is conveyed to the viewer. Let's move to perspective. And perspective is also part of the fundamentals. Here, it was not bad. I mean, it's a 2 point perspective. It's not nothing challenging. However, I wanted to reinforce that sense of perspective. That's why I placed that grid in the ground to really tell the viewer, oh, see how the C-axis is getting increasingly larger. By the way, the C-axis, I hope you is self-explanatory, but just in case, this distance is the same technically, but due to the perspective, they are show differently in the 2D plane. Okay, And I also made a point to duplicate that grid and increase the brightness and make that semi-plane, that corner where the light hits, and show that highlight to create a sense of form. It could have been sufficient, maybe just doing that single grid, but doing the double trick to show that corner where the light hits gives a increased sense of form, because otherwise, and you can see it rapidly here, otherwise that transition between bricks is very flat. It's not, it does not convey the same sense of form. Okay. Um, let's see. There was another thing I think with the perspective. Oh yeah, you can see that the decoration in the structure behind the two figures has been changed because the biggest difference between planes has to be through the depiction of a right plane. Okay, of a right angle. Sorry, the biggest difference between two planes is putting those two planes in a right angle. That's why I opted to change those slanted decorations for something that looks more perpendicular. Okay, you can see that between the difference between those two. And that's because I strongly believe that making planes more perpendicular is going to show more form than not making those planes perpendicular. Okay. Obviously, this is something that is going to differ greatly depending on the structure of the element. But here that we are dealing with architecture, it's okay to show them as a right plane. Another thing that I wanted to show is or to add, is the interaction between elements. And you can see with the hands. Here, the hands are obviously interacting with the dress, the body through the dress, and that's shown to the folds, the added folds, that the wrinkles that are the result of applying pressure with the fingers. And the other hand, the hand of the female figure, is going to touch the hair of the groom, and is going to affect that hair. It's not it's something that was added. So yeah, try to seek changes to add interaction between your elements. Okay, that's going to make a more interesting visual experience. Uh, let's move back to the hand. And this is something that I wanted to make a point to. You don't have to render everything individually. There is a thing, I think every art, every medium has it, that is implication. You can write by implication, you can compose by implication, you can draw, you can paint by implication. So here, for example, you can see that the fingers in the original are rendered individually. But I know that the fingers are acting as a unity. So that means that I can group those fingers and create a single mass. And that is going to add that element of implication I just told you about. And it's going to save me strokes. I am exercising stroke economy too. So you can see that that mass of the fingers is almost uninterrupted here. There are parts of the hand that fuse together, and the occlusion is very selective. It's not applied all the way through the fingers. It's used on the space, the crevices that matters, that is around the knuckles. So this is like when people say don't give to the public 2 plus 2 equals 4. Just give them 2 plus 2 and let them do the addition. Okay, it's a principle of storytelling. It's mostly based in show don't tell. If you are familiar with writing, this is the show don't tell of painting. Okay. Um, so let's move to yeah. There was something I wanted to add. I just remembered it. I'm going to do that very quickly. I promise. And you remember that thing I said that the dress was very reflective? That means it's going to catch some of that blue from the uniform. And I am going to apply that with a color layer very quickly. I'm going to blend away uh, something like that. Let's see. Um, let's move this a bit farther. So yeah, it's just a small touch that I wanted to add, and it's very barely noticeable, but it adds a bit of that interaction I was talking about. In this case, the light is bouncing from the uniform to the dress, so it's a it's a valid interaction. Um, okay, another thing that was added from the original, and you can see that in the original all the corners are equally bright. So there is a thing called vignette, the vignette effect, that is darkening the corners of the composition to make the viewer focus on the center. So you can see that compared to the original, those four corners are darker. And I could have gone even further with this. For example, the dress is more or less is more implied in the overpay, but I could even go farther and fuse together the dress with the ground in some areas. For example, here in the drop shadow, the shadows create a low contrast area, and here is because of that vignette effect. So you can see that it's not something that you are going to notice that much, but it adds to the visual interest of the piece. Usually, when you combine different edges, and you remember that those edges are hard edge, soft edge, and lost edge, when you employ those three, you are going to make a more interesting piece. Okay, that's too much. So here I am blending because it's atmospheric perspective. Okay. This area, I never knew what it was, and my patron didn't make a note about it. He was very pleased with the review, but I forgot to ask what that area was. I think it was a stair. Anyway, as you can see, I am blending away some areas strategically, and as I said, the area where there is mostly in shadows. It's going to be very soft edge. Everything is going to fuse together because everything is in shadow. Okay, so it's a very small thing, but it adds to that visual interest to the piece and reinforces that vignette effect too. Okay, you can see that this is literal and this is implied. That there are a lot of implication here, not only in the hand, but the way those edges fuse together different elements. Okay. Okay. I think that's about it. And there might be another areas that I forgot to mention, but those are the most important points in the overview. And I hope this has been useful for you. Uh, as always, just please be reminded that I offer this service on my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Fires, and you are going to be granted one review per week, and you are going to have everything else. So, I mean, the exclusives I cannot mention because I'm going to post this video in public sites. But you are going to have every reward I post very frequently, and you are going to have this service that includes the overpay itself, the notes, the video is going to be a timelapse video. These kind of videos are special because I not always consider that a review merits a voiceover video. There are some that do merit, but they are non safe for work. So I only post those in my Patreon. I post voiceover videos that you are not going to see in social media sites. So the point of the voiceover videos is that I consider the review a good example for not only for my patrons, but for my for the artists of the piece, but also for other artists. So I asked my patron if he or she is going to be okay with me doing a voiceover video, and if he or she gives me permission, I prepared this voiceover video that further explains and adds other aspects um, of the overvein. Okay, so don't think if you become a patron you are going to be put on blast. No, at first I am just going to give you the review, and only if you are okay with it. You can opt for a voiceover video. Otherwise, I'm still going to give you a video, but it's going to be a time-lapse video. Okay. You can also add me on Discord, and I will be happy to answer any question you may have about the review itself, or any other question you may have about art, about the craft, doubts you might have about your overall work. So yeah, I hope this has been useful, as I say, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.